Okay, today we're going to be learning about percent change. So I would like you to copy down this formula. Since you have the percent change equal to the amount of change over the original amount, and we know that the percent change will be the actual percentage, it looks like a proportion if written like this. So what we're comparing is the amount of the increase or decrease to the original amount. Okay? So it's either an amount of increase or an amount of decrease. In example 1, tell whether the change is an increase or decrease and then find the percent of change. So if you're given the original amount, right, say there were 50 kids, I don't know, in 7th grade, which there's not, and then in 8th grade only 36 registered, the new amount. Did the enrollment increase or decrease? Decrease. So it's kind of easy to tell. So what we have to do is use that formula and tell how much did it decrease? What did it change by? So the amount of change becomes 50 minus 36. So our proportion would look like this. A percent change would be equal to the amount of change, and in this case, 50 minus 36 over the original. So we have to go back to the original. And we're solving for P. Okay, a couple different ways to do this. One, you could use the concept of, 50 times 2 is 100, so 14 times 2 must be our answer, or cross multiplication, lots of different ways, but we know that P then will be equal to 28%. And this was a decrease of 28%. So when 50 is decreased by 28%, the new result is 36. So let's try B. If you originally had 10 and your new amount is 29.5, is it decrease or increase? Obviously it went up, it's an increase. So this one's an increase. Again, we need to do the amount of change. So it's the same formula, and you can set it up as a proportion. And in this case, let's do the positive amount of change over the original amount. So we have 1950, and it went up quite a bit. So when you get this answer, it's actually over 100%, and that's okay. So 195% increase. Okay, in example 2, we're going to be finding the new amount. So you kind of have to pay close attention to whether you're increasing or decreasing the amount. So a couple different things here. We're given the percentage or the percent change. So we already know the P over 100 ratio as 22 over 100. So 78 is decreased by 22%. So we kind of need to know what is 22% of 78 first. We have lots of ways to figure that out, right? We can change 22% to a decimal and use multiplication. That's one way. But that's not the final step. That just tells us the amount of the change. We would then have to use subtraction to find the new amount. So we can do a couple things. So I'll go ahead and set this up as a proportion. And in this case, what x is equal to is the new amount. And I get 17 and 16/100ths. So I need to take the original amount minus the new amount to see what the decrease actually is, and it is decreased by 22%. The new amount is 60 and 84/100ths. So I don't know if I said that right. 17 and 16/100ths is the amount of the change. So to calculate the new amount, you use subtraction, okay? Another way to look at that, 78% is the original amount, is like being compared to our 100%. That's the original, right? And 22% is how much it's decreased. So what is left is actually 78%, because if you take 100% minus 22%, that equals 78%. So this amount, the 60 and 84 hundredths, is actually 78% of the original, because it was decreased by 22%. So I relate this to shopping. If I'm shopping for something and it's, say it's $100, right? Just flat out make it easy. $100 and it's 30% off. Well, I'm saving 30%, but what am I paying of the original amount? 70%, right? So there's always two percentages that'll make up 100, right? You have what you're saving plus what you're paying would equal the total or the original amount, which is 100. So if you can kind of be thinking about it in terms of that, what makes it up, you can also do a math problem similar to this one. So if we take 78% of 78, so 0.78%, right, 78 times our original amount, that gives us this new amount right off the bat. And that's how I do the math when I'm shopping. I don't do subtraction if I'm doing an amount change, like how I'm saving money. I wouldn't do, well, let me figure out what 30% of 100 is, and then let me subtract that from 100. I would say if I'm saving 30%, I'm paying 70%. So let me just calculate 70% of 100, and I know right off the bat what my answer is. So that's one thing to think about. For part B, we could do the same thing. We could set it up as the proportion. I'm not trying to discount that way of thinking. So we have 60 over 100. And since this is being increased, right, this was being decreased, this x is our amount of change, right? So when we calculate this mid-step, x is equal to 4.8, we now have to add it in because 8 is being increased by this amount. So 12.8 is our final answer, right? That's the new amount. 8 is increased by 60%, that equals 12.8. When you're increasing, remember that 8 being the original amount accounts for the 100%. Increasing by 60 means we're going to basically increase 8 by 160%. When you increase something by 160%, you can calculate 160% of it. Remember, changing a percent to a decimal would be 1.6 times 8, and that gives you the answer. So that's just another way to get that same thing if you had to calculate an increase. Okay. At its first visit to the vet, a puppy weighed 28 pounds, and then 3 months later the puppy weighed 46 pounds. And we want to know what the percent increase is for this. So we see two totally different weights. We can calculate the amount of the change in the puppy's weight so that we can then relate it to its original weight and find the increase. So we can take our proportion, and in this case it's going to be 46 minus 28 over the original. This is where it's important that you set up the proportion correctly. Okay, don't just grab a random number or just the bigger number. It's always what did it start out as, because this is an increase. It started out as something smaller. So calculate this proportion. And you'll find that his percent increase is approximately 64.3%. And our final example today, at an annual concert, it was attended by 4,212 people last year. This year, the number attended increased by 14% over last year's amount. So how many people attended this year? So we need to find this new amount, because we need to increase 4,212 by 14%. So I will again set that up two ways for you using the proportion. Our percent ratio is given. This proportion will solve for the amount of change. And again, when I solve these types of problems, I'm using a cross multiplication. So the mid step would be 100x is equal to the product of 4,212 times 14. And then divide both sides by 100 to give you an increase of this amount, and then we will add that together and realize that we have to round up to make a whole person. So what is about 4,802 people attended this year. Again, I can also use the concept of percentages. Percent increases are over 100%. So if I have 100% plus 14%, I will have 114% of what I had last year. In this case, change it to a decimal, times it by what you had last year, and you get 4,802. Same answer, two different ways to go about it, using proportional thinking and the concept of percents over or under 100.